Hi there. In this tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate the simple methods for creating an effect, something like this. So what this is particles being created in response to certain frequencies within the music that I'll play along with this at the end of the video. And you can see it's a bit like an oscilloscope. You can see there's pulses of particles as this thing rotates around, and you may be able to see that each of the rings is not exactly the same. And that's because I've got high frequencies, medium frequencies in the middle and low frequencies on the outer ring. I decided to do this using particle effect rather than geometry nodes because I think there's been quite a lot of geometry node tutorials lately, and I thought it's a little simpler just doing this with particle effect. I also used the cycles render engine because Eevee doesn't support certain effects within particles yet. If you enjoy these tutorials, don't forget to click like and subscribe. Feel free to comment or ask questions or even dislike the video. And if you don't like the video, I'd be very interested to see what the issues you spotted were so that I can improve going forward. If you're a Patreon supporter, I do upload these files for any use available to my Patreon supporters, and I upload tutorials quite regularly. So let's start the tutorial. So to begin with, I'm going to add a curve, which is a circle. And we'll rotate that on the X 90. I'm just going to go and turn off the grids, and we'll go into orthographic view, and we'll make that circle reasonably sizable. Because I'm going to be using this as a path, it's worth applying the scale and rotation. We'll call this circle path low. That was a curve object, as you can see by the fact that we've got a curve object data property option available here. And now I'm going to add another circle, and this is going to be a mesh circle. Now it doesn't have to be a circle, you could use anything you want. I decided to use circles in order to essentially create types. So you can see that's a circle, but if we go into edit mode, you can see it's created from vertices. I'm not actually going to add any real substance to this circle. It's not going to have any more dimensions than the 2. It's not going to have any thickness or anything like that. But before we go any further, what I will do is we'll name it. So we'll call this circle emit low, and then I'll go into constraints down here and we'll add an object constraint, and we'll say follow path. There is a sort of shortcut way of doing this, but I'm just going to do it the full way. The shortcut way is to group it, and when you group it, it will ask you if you want to animate the path. But I'm going to here select the circle path low, and you can see there's now a little line joining it. If I press play, you can see nothing's really happening at the moment, and that's because we haven't animated the path yet. So if I click that button, now you can see it's actually following the path. We obviously need to adjust the position of it. So GZ, and we'll just bring that down to about there. We'll zoom in a little. You can see it's related to the segments, they're not really vertices, but the segments of the outer ring. And I'm going to rotate it on the Y 90. So if we have a look at that now, it's going round, it's following the path, but obviously not quite what I had in mind. So if we click follow curve, I probably should have done that before I rotated it because it's now doing essentially what I wanted, but it's rotated. So I'm going to rotate on the X 90 and then rotate on the Y 90 again. And now if we run that, you can see we've got that following a nice path, effectively as if it was forming a tube around the big circle. So we're ready now to create some particles. Because we're doing this in cycles, it's better to use actual objects as particles. So I'm going to create a simple icosphere. We'll put that over here somewhere. We'll make it smaller just in case the camera ended up seeing it, and we'll apply the scale. We'll give this a material and we'll call this particle matte low. I'm going to set the base color to black, and for the time being I'm going to set the emission color to white, and the emission strength can stay where it is. So just going to go to my camera just to make things quicker when I need to quickly look, and we'll move that back a little bit, so something like that. So I've selected my circle emit low. We'll call the icosphere particle low, select my emitter, come over to particle systems, and we'll add a particle system. So if I play that now, you can see there's some particles being emitted, but they're only coming from the center. It's actually quite an interesting shape because of the movement that's going on, but it's not quite what we need. I'm only running this animation at 250 frames. If you wanted to cover an entire piece of music, it will have to be quite a few thousands of frames long. But I want it to run to the end of the animation, so I'm going to set that to 250, and we will need to change the number of particles and the lifetime as well. But we now need to set what we emit from, and I found the best option was to use vertices. Now you can see they're coming from the edges of the circle rather than the center. So now we've got the problem of them dropping, which I decided I didn't want. I wanted them to effectively stay in place. So I then came down to field weights and just set gravity to 0. You can see by default they're still flowing out, and that's because there is a velocity added, and you can see that it's 1 meter per second. So I'll set that to 0. And now you can see they don't move at all. You can see they're disappearing about halfway round the circle, and that's because of the lifetime of the particles. So you can play around with that. What I ended up doing was adding a small amount of random to the lifetime of the particles. They didn't all disappear at exactly the same time, so about 30% here. And then this will depend on how fast you're going round the circle, but I decided to then increase the life of the particles to the point where the emitter almost caught up with its tail. So you can see it's catching up there, so somewhere around there for the current one, maybe even 100, because in fact I think the default animation cycle time is 100 frames. So let's just talk about that. You can see it's almost catching its tail there. If I select this outer circle and I go to curve properties and then come under here under path animation, which you'll notice is ticked, you can see this is how many frames it takes to animate through the entire circle. So if I've got 250 frames for my entire animation, but a cycle is completed in 100 frames, then it will obviously go round 2.5 times. If I set this to merely 50, you can see it's going round much faster now. That also means effectively we will need more particles to fill it up because we're going round so much faster. So you need to think about how fast that's going to be. On the other hand, if you go too slow, you're going to struggle to see the waveform of the music. If I set this to 250, obviously it's going more slowly, but it's only going to get round once in 250 frames. So at this point, I think I'm going to set this to 500 frames, which means it'll go around a couple of times. What I'll also therefore need to do is come back to my particle emitter, because that's ending at frame 250 at the moment. So I need to set that to frame 500, because otherwise it stops emitting. And of course, because we're now moving more slowly, the particles are catching up again, so the lifetime needs to be longer. So let's go for 200 on the lifetime, and it looks like we need to be even slightly longer than that, so that's not too bad. So that's the base system, and now all we need to do is change the way these particles are emitted based on, as it happens, we're going to use the scale of this emitter. I'm just going to increase the particles a little. I'm going to go for 3000 particles. I actually emitted much more than that. And what we can also do is we can play around with the size. Under physics, I also added a small amount of Brownian motion, which is just simulating particles being moved around a little bit by, if you like, being impacted by air molecules and whatever. That's possibly a little bit too much, so we'll go for 0.2. And it just adds a little bit of movement, maybe 0.6. There we go. So they do start to drift, but relatively slowly, and that just adds a little something useful when you're creating snowflakes and things like that. Drop it slightly and go to 0.5. So if you now come down to render, it's currently set to render as halo. We're going to say object, and we're going to select our particle low. See, that's coming out quite small now, and we can scale it up to where we want to be. I don't want it to be too big, and then I decided to apply some randomness to the scale as well, so it'll have different size particles. You can see there they are. So what I'm going to do now is open up a new window, and I'm going to change that to the graph editor. I've got my circle emit low selected, and I'm going to press I, hovering over the layout window, and just say scale. I haven't changed anything, but I've added a keyframe for scale, and you notice I've got some options come up here now. If I open those up, there they are. So I'm going to select, for example, the X scale now, go up to key, and I'm going to say bake sound to F curves, and I'm going to use this one. Now before I click bake sound to F curves down here, have a look up here and you can see frequencies. So the lowest frequency is 0 BC, and the highest frequency is currently 100,000 kilohertz apparently, which is rather high. So I'm going to set the highest frequency to 250. We don't need to change anything else at the moment. We will need to have a look at these when we go for the higher frequencies, but for the low frequency these are fine. and then I'll click Bake Sound to F Curves, and you notice for this particular piece of music we get a sort of heartbeat appearing there. And because I don't want to do anything too fancy, I'm just going to do exactly the same thing for the other two. Don't need to change any of the settings, it will remember the last ones, and I'll do the Z as well. So if we run that animation, you can already see that we've got something that's pretty acceptable in terms of these particles. You can see the audio is actually showing up here. If you want to hear the audio with it, then what we can do is, for example, add another window, and we'll change this one to the video sequencer, and we'll add sound, and we'll add the same audio. Now it's very important to make sure that it starts on the same frame as the animation, otherwise you won't be comparing the same things together. So let's look at that now. And you can see it's very definitely responding to the music. Now what you may want to do is adjust offsets and levels. So if we come to modifiers, if we add a modifier which is envelope, make sure you are on frame 1 and just click add control point. And then what we can do is adjust this. So if I get the animation running, and we can adjust the max to make it larger, and then we can adjust the reference to bring that down to somewhere closer to 0. So effectively the scale for, in this case, Z will now be close to the 0 point and bigger than it otherwise would have been, so reasonably sizable. So what I now need to do is, if you click here, we can copy that modifier and its setups, come over to the Y scale and paste that in there, and then do the same on X. So you can now see we're getting a larger deflection, if you like. I'll just do one more ring rather than all three, because it's essentially going to now be the same exercise for each of them. So we'll come back to the beginning of the animation, and I'll select both of these rings, Shift D to duplicate, and you can see they are where they are up here. We'll call this one high, just so that they're nice and different from each other, and this one high. I also need to duplicate this little particle, so we'll make a copy of that one, and we'll make this particle high. And of course you could do as many of these as you want, just requires some extra work. Come to the material for that one. There's now two objects with that material, so I'll click there and then rename that material. So I'm now going to select my circle path high, and I'm going to scale that in a little. So if we just press play, we've currently got the same thing coming from each of them. If I select my circle limit high now, you can see those particles are in there. So we'll need to bake new sound curves for that one. So this is already my circle limit high that we've got selected. So I'll select the X scale, and we'll say under key, bake sound to F curve, same file. Again, make sure you're on frame 1 when you do this. This time I'm going to set the lowest frequency to say 1000 and the highest frequency to say 10,000. Bake that. You can see it's much lower, as you would actually expect. And then do the same for the other axes. And then we'll just need to reset our limits. So the reference can be obviously quite a bit higher. You can see a sort of ghosting of the other axes, by the way. So that looks pretty fair. So I'm just going to copy that one. Now when you come to paste this into the others, make sure you delete the existing one first, otherwise it will be added on top, which obviously we don't want. Delete that modifier and add that one. So if we start that now, we should be able to see, although it's obviously got some similarities, some common elements, just make that a little smaller, it's a different set of frequencies. So if there was some singing or something, it would be responding to that rather than the low frequencies which we're getting with the bass drum and all the rest of it. So if we see what this is looking like rendered at the moment, and we change the background to black, we've just got these white dots right now. So that's not terribly interesting. So first of all, I'm going to go to the shader editor, and we'll select our particle low, which is the outer set of particles, but they've all got the same material on at the moment. And we've got our default principled shader with just a light grey / white emission material with a strength of 1. I'm now going to add a node under input called the particle info node. This only works in cycles at the moment. And in here we've got age and lifetime. So this is the age of the particle, how long since it was emitted, and what the maximum lifetime for that particular particle is going to be. I'm then going to add under converters a math node and set that to divide. Put age into one side and lifetime into the other. So what we're effectively doing is we're creating a number which relates to how far through its lifetime a particle has got. And when it gets to 1, it's reached the end of its life. It's about to disappear. I'm then going to add a converter, which is a color ramp, and put that value into one side of the color ramp. And then I'm going to take the color output of the color ramp into the emission color. So you can already see it's actually backwards, but we've got dark particles that become brighter over time. So if I now flip that, what we'll get is particles that start bright and then over time they get darker. You can see them just beginning to fade out there, and just before they vanish completely, they're very dark. So to make that a bit more interesting, I drag that in a little. I set that to B-spline, which makes it a sort of more gradual fall off, and then added a couple more points. In fact, I'll leave the black one there, but I will add another one there. And for this purpose, I'm going to set that one to a sort of very dark blue sort of colour. Then we'll have a sort of cyan perhaps. This one a bright green, and then maybe that one up at yellow somewhere. So now you can see we've got particles that start at quite a bright yellow, and then over time they fade through green, down to blue, and then go out to black. And you can change the rate that it does that here. But I also wanted to change how bright the particles were, so I'm going to add another math node, and we'll set this one to multiply. We'll take that output again into one side of that, and we'll just set this to some value greater than 1, and we'll put that into the emission strength, and we can turn that up quite a way if we want to. And all that's doing is any value that isn't 0 or is a significant distance above 0 is going to get multiplied up and made much brighter. The darkest particles, the ones at or close to 0 in terms of their expected life, are still going to be very dark, so they're still going to fade out essentially. So at the moment all the particles are using the same material, so I'm now going to select particle high, go to materials and click this little 2, which will make it a unique material, and we'll change the name of that one to high, and I'm just going to put some different colours on it. So let's go for a nice bright red colour perhaps, followed by purple, blue, and then maybe pinkish sort of colour down there. Maybe we'll make that slightly more orange, and then red. But we also need to go to our circle emit high, go to the particle system. Currently they've both got the same particle system. Again, strictly you should change the names of these, especially if you're going to make lots of these, but I'm just going to click here. So we've now got a unique particle system. Come down here and change this to particle high, and now you can see we've got a unique set of colours for the inner particle system compared to the outer one. And then finally a little bit about compositing. If I let this just run, go round once just to give us a full circle. I did add a couple of effects at the compositor, so we'll change this now to the compositor. We'll say use nodes, and we'll give that a quick render. We'll set this to a relatively low number of samples. We only need sort of 8 for the viewport, and we'll say 32 for render. We don't really need to denoise it, and under light paths we don't really need reflective or refractive caustics either. You could probably even reduce these total light paths because we're only seeing direct light at the moment. And then we'll give that a render. There we are, that's our initial render, which looks fine, but I decided to add a few effects just to make it a little more interesting. So I'm going to add, under filters, a blur filter. We'll set it to fast Gaussian, relative, and Y, which just means Y is the shortest axis, and I set these to about 5%. See, that's given us a very blurry image there. And then I'm going to add, under color, a mix node. Take the original image into one side and the blurred image into the other. I'm going to set it to add and turn the factor down quite a bit and go even further than that. There we go. So it's just giving us a sort of fog glow. There is a glare filter where you can add fog glow directly, but I decided I preferred the control that I got with that one. And then I'm going to add an actual glare filter, drop that into there. I'm going to set that to ghosts, which is sort of simulating the lenses in a camera. Set it to high, which makes it slower, but allows it to pick out finer detail. I set it to 4 iterations and increase the color mod to something like 500 and something, and I turned the threshold down a little bit. Now this particular render, I've got the brightness of these particles slightly higher than originally, so we can adjust the mix. I actually want the threshold slightly higher there. So this is the threshold at which the effect starts to take effect. So by making this much bigger, only the brighter particles will register for this effect. You can see it's too high now, so I bring that down a little bit and we start to get the effect. And that's all there is to creating that effect. You can obviously duplicate this, you can have different frequency ranges for each of them. It doesn't have to be a circle the way I did it. It could be any shape you want. You could animate shape keys, so you could have different shapes taking place that change in scale or change in particular vertices or change position. You could do anything you like with these. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. If you did, let me know. I will upload the original file for my Patreon supporters as normal. Otherwise, I will see you in the next tutorial. Thanks a lot.